Hello, everybody. This is Ron, and welcome back to the Ron Reviews podcast. This is episode 3, and I've been having a lot of fun with this so far. I did a Green Lantern podcast, and then I also did a podcast on a couple Star Wars issues from the early pre-Force Awakens era. And I had a lot of fun doing both of those. I like this format because I'm doing it like a podcast where you can just listen to it. You don't really have to watch it. But I also edit them the same way that I edit my review videos. So it kind of works both ways. And I like doing this because it's a quicker way for me to get my thoughts out when I'm talking about older comics or anything really. Well, today I'm going to be talking about an older comic and a new comic at the same time. So anyway, let's get into it. Today I am going to be talking about Nemesis, a comic by Mark Millar and Steve McNiven originally. And that came out in 2010. I had to look that up because it's been a little while since I've read it. And I don't know why I thought it was earlier than that, but it makes sense because I think that was around the same time that the Kick-Ass movie was coming out, and the first issue or the first couple issues of Nemesis were in stores around that time. So that does make sense. So yeah, I wanted to talk about this story, and then I thought it would be cool to compare it with the new series, Nemesis Reloaded, that just wrapped up this year. And the trade paperback just came out a couple weeks ago. So I thought I'd do a podcast on both of them, comparing them and trying to figure out which one I like more. So yeah, both of these stories were written by Mark Millar, of course. I'm a huge fan of Mark Millar. I've made no secret about that. I feel like he's just been on fire lately, but I mean, he's kind of always been on fire, to me at least, because I really like the period where he was trying a bunch of different styles or a bunch of different genres. You know, you have something like Starlight that is more of a sort of Flash Gordon type thing. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have, you know, something like, I don't know, MPH, for example. It's totally different stories. So I feel like he has a lot of range. He was always an interesting creator in that way. And I always picked up his stuff, you know, even the Old Man Logan story or Civil War. I always liked his stories, but yeah, it was really in that middle part of his career where he was doing stuff like Starlight and Jupiter's Legacy and all those books where I really got invested in all of his stories. And then he comes back again doing stuff like Nemesis Reloaded, Nightclub, The Ambassadors, and Prodigy, Magic Order. I mean, the list goes on, and I really enjoy all of them. So it's really cool that after all this time, he's still really invested in making the best comics. And it also helps that he's just a cool guy. I've watched a lot of interviews with him. It's pretty nice that he's spending a lot of time now going on different people's YouTube channels and talking about his projects and also just talking about anything, movies, TV shows. And he just sounds like a normal guy. He's one of us. He's one of the guys that grew up going to the comic book shops. So yeah, this was a cool idea to maybe go back and try to fix some things that maybe he didn't like about the original Nemesis, because I have heard that he wasn't totally happy with the way it came out. I think that has to do with the original Nemesis only being 4 issues, which is kind of weird for him because most of his stories are at least 5 or 6 issues. So I feel like maybe if he had a little bit more time to flesh it out a little bit, he would still be happy with it. Because he felt that way and wanted to reboot it, he did make a really cool, I guess you would call it like a soft reboot, but it is totally different. This isn't the same Nemesis that's in the first book because it has nothing to do with it. That comic was on the Icon imprint, and I think that was an offshoot of Marvel, and he did Kick-Ass on that as well, because both of those hardcovers, if you put one of the Kick-Ass hardcovers next to the Nemesis hardcover. They both have pretty much like the same design to it. Okay, so let's get into the original Nemesis. Like I said, 4 issues. It reminds me of just like a blockbuster movie. So I guess before I really get into it, I'll just tell you what it's about, just in case you've never read either of these stories. The basic idea is, what if Batman, a billionaire playboy, was actually an asshole and didn't want to save anyone? So there's a really cool intro that has a lot of action to it. Steve McNiven is a great artist. He did Old Man Logan and also Civil War with Mark Miller. So they were a really cool team. And this is the perfect book for them too, because, you know, both of those books were pretty violent, especially Old Man Logan. So it's just a no-brainer to have Steve McNiven come in and do this type of story. And I like this because he's in Tokyo hunting down a police inspector who is seen as the best cop in Tokyo. So that's the challenge, right? So we see how quickly he takes him down. And then we're introduced to the main protagonist of the story, Blake Morrow, who right off the bat you can tell is a pretty no-nonsense cop. He'll go through whatever he has to get the job done, even sneaking into like a Quickie Mart dressed as a hobo, basically, to take down some guys that were robbing it. So that just sets up the whole dynamic between Nemesis and this guy Blake Morrow. He's set up as this guy that always wins, always outsmarts the enemy. But then you have somebody like Nemesis, who is this genius playboy millionaire. You know, it's like if Bruce Wayne was evil. And if Bruce Wayne was evil, that's a pretty solid antagonist, because he's always got a plan for something. He's smarter than everyone. So it's a really good setup between these two characters. You really want to see them go head to head. It doesn't take too long for that to happen. But yeah, everything that happens in this comic is over the top, and it's designed to be that way. It's this big blockbuster widescreen comic. Nemesis hijacks Air Force One and immediately kidnaps the president, which is great for these first 2 issues, because he's basically saying to this Blake Morrow guy, if I can kidnap the president this easily, you don't stand a chance. It's such a high stakes story immediately. And part of me kind of likes that he did all of this in 4 issues. I know he might not think it was one of his best books, but it is pretty impressive because it didn't really feel that rushed. I mean, like I said, I'm sure you could flesh it out. And when we talk about Nemesis Reloaded, you really see how much a couple more issues helps a story like this. But yeah, I thought it was pretty solid. And then I also love the classic, you know, Nemesis gets caught by Blake Morrow and he thinks he's hot shit because he caught this guy already and no one else could. But obviously Nemesis has a plan to break out, and this was all his idea. That also happens in The Dark Knight with the Joker. He gets himself caught, but it's all part of the plan. So it's kind of like that, and on purpose, I would say. I don't know if Mark Miller took that from The Dark Knight. What did that come out in 2008? And then this came out in 2010. So maybe, especially when you think about it, like if the Joker was Batman, basically. But yeah, the name that's thrown out there for a possible origin for Nemesis, Matthew Anderson, is used in both books, but they're slightly different. And in this one, the setup is that his parents, Matthew Anderson, his parents or his dad got busted for something pretty heinous. He was hunting down teenagers as sport or something, because they were just rich people that were bored, I guess, and were doing that for fun, and he got locked up for it. And Blake Morrow was the guy who put him in jail or sentenced him. So Nemesis became a supervillain to take him down. So that's the general idea. And then that kind of gets flipped on its head later on in the story when Nemesis says that it's all bullshit, basically. And he just did that to, I don't know, come up with a scenario just for fun. And then obviously that's a little bit different in the new Nemesis book, Nemesis Reloaded. But yeah, both books have the main protagonist forced to say some pretty embarrassing things. This one is pretty shocking. The new one doesn't get as crazy as this. Nemesis ends up kidnapping Blake Morrow's kids, and he says he will turn them over if Blake Morrow is truthful about answering a couple of Nemesis questions. So first he asks him about his marriage life, and Blake Morrow says that his wife cheated on him or had an affair with one of his coworkers because he worked too much, and he also was a poor performer in bed. So just like really embarrassing stuff. He also says that his daughter had an abortion, but she didn't tell him because she was ashamed. And then this is the most wild part of the book, and I'm sure YouTubers have gone over this full story, but the son impregnated the daughter. So I guess Nemesis took his sperm and impregnated the daughter, which is crazy. And then he also says if you try to abort it, I made it in a way where she could never have kids again. So she's basically forced to give birth. So that was pretty much like the most shocking thing in this book. Man, what an idea to think of for a story. But hey, Mark Miller did it. I mean, he did a lot of stuff like this earlier on, especially with Wanted too. A lot of shocking things in that book, the way people talk. And I like that because he does it in a way where he makes the stories really compelling, but then he adds that shocking stuff to kind of get noticed and be like, hey, I'm here, I'm doing something a little different. And I also have my creator-owned characters, so I think it really made him stand out. And I think people at first just thought he was just doing it to be edgy or shocking, but he also is a talented writer, so he makes this stuff work. And it's not really so easy to just write a book and think of the most shocking thing you can. You also have to, know the craft a little bit. So yeah, out of the two, this one definitely feels like a one-off movie that would come out like in the 90s or something. I don't know why I just feel like it kind of has that Cape Fear vibe a little bit. Yeah, I could see it being like one of those movies back in the day. It ends up at the White House at the end, and Nemesis has a bomb strapped to Blake Morrow's wife and the president of the United States, and he has to choose which one is going to die. And luckily, the president decides to take one for the team, and he tells Blake, just do it because I'm sick of this, and I'd be happy to take this guy out with me. So he tries to take out Nemesis as he explodes, and then that goes into a whole fight with Blake and Nemesis. Obviously, Blake comes out of it alive. And then the interesting thing about the ending is the letter that Blake Morrow gets saying, there was someone else behind this, and he basically offers a service to rich people that want to pretend to be someone else. This Nemesis guy wanted to be a supervillain, so he went out and he got him all the gadgets. The only thing that's missing in that little letter is, okay, well, he can give him all the technology and stuff to become a supervillain, but he still had to train to do all this Batman type of stuff because, halfway through the story, he's breaking out of prison and he kills like 90 SWAT guys or whatever. So he also had to train. But the other confusing thing was that the letter was delivered like 10 years before or something. It's like, how did that guy know that all this was going to happen? I don't know. That was a little confusing. And one of the interesting things was him saying to Blake Morrow that, you're off the hook because you came out on top. But he does warn him to stay out of the Los Angeles area. And I think it's interesting that with the new Nemesis, it takes place in Los Angeles, even though it's not related at all. So that was a cool little, I don't know if it's like an Easter egg or just a reference to this one. But Yeah, so that's the first Nemesis. Not for everyone. I liked it. I like these concepts that he comes up with. And sometimes I do like that quick, 4 issue, one and done. You don't have to read a whole year's worth of comics to get into this. It's just a story. You think of it like a movie. Like, all right, I'm gonna watch Air Force One. It's a beginning, middle, and end. There's no sequels. That's it. So now let's move on to Nemesis Reloaded. This just came out this year. There was a lot of hype around it. I originally thought it was gonna somehow be a continuation of this story, but now it makes much more sense because he is integrating the Nemesis character into his Miller World universe. So he pretty much had to reboot it and do a totally different story. And it works. It really works. I would say I enjoyed it more the second time when I read it in the trade, because I ordered the trade. I read it in issues. I mean, this happens sometimes when you read some in issues. You're waiting sometimes like a month or 2 months for the next issue to come out, and then you go, wait, what happened last issue? I forget, and you have to go back and read it. So when you just sit down one morning and read all 5 or 6 issues of the trade, it's much better. The story flows better, and you notice things that you didn't notice the first time around. And I think this was way more fleshed out. It was way more suited to be a comic book. I feel like the first one would have been a great movie, but this one, is a pure comic book. It has art by Jorge Jimenez, who is a Batman artist, and I really like his style. It works for Nemesis as well. The name Matthew Anderson is in this again, but this time it really is who Nemesis is. We get his whole origin, and it's not just a fabrication, which is nice because you really get to do a deep dive and see what this kid was all about, his upbringing, and it's kind of similar. Both his parents got busted for a bunch of murders, and that's what you're led to believe in the beginning. So a lot of these story elements are very similar to the original, but it's tweaked in a way that's a little bit of an improvement, I think, because we get the actual origin for Nemesis, and then it's the same thing with Blake Morrow. He put away Matthew Anderson's parents or dad in the first book, and this new character, Joe Costello, who's an ex-cop and now he's a mayor. So he was the one who put the Nemesis in this one, Matthew Anderson. He put his parents away. So that's really why he's Nemesis. It's not because he is a billionaire that's bored and just wants to do something for fun. He really does have it out for Joe Costello, which makes the story better. And like I said, it's 5 issues instead of 4, so you have that extra issue to really flesh everything out. And some things that happen in issue 1 that don't really make sense at first start to come into focus in issues 4 and 5. So that's why the trade reading is a lot better, in my opinion. Yeah, because in issue 1, he kidnaps this older couple and he makes them henchmen. It didn't make much sense because a lot of the other henchmen are younger people and they're more capable. But then Miller brings it all the way back around at the end, and you realize that they are actually the people that were on a murdering spree, and his parents, who were just drug dealers, got framed for that crime. And one of the biggest differences is, Blake Morrow had some embarrassing stuff in his past, like his wife having an affair and him admitting that he wasn't good in bed, basically. But this one is interesting because this Joe Costello guy really turns out to not be such a great guy, because he put Matthew Anderson's parents away knowing full well that they didn't commit those crimes, just because him and his colleagues wanted a win to really put them on the map as good cops. So I do like that aspect respect more, because it's one of those things where you almost feel like it's justified what he's doing, but then, you realize how much carnage he has unleashed on Los Angeles. And you go back and forth. You think Joe Costello is a good guy, and then they pull the rug from under you at the end. And yeah, you don't know how to feel about it. But it's definitely more compelling than a rich guy who's bored and makes up a story. This is a Matthew Anderson who's driven by this hatred and goes and trains like Batman to one day have his revenge. But he also happens to be a really crazy supervillain. And the whole time, there are flashbacks of his training by a master who wears a mask, and it's very cult-like and it's very ominous. And I really didn't know where that was going the whole time, but I knew it was going to be something big because Mark Millar was hinting at this big event that he was going to do right after this book with all of his Miller World characters. And this does not disappoint, because in the final issue, once this whole Nemesis origin is wrapped up, basically, he comes in contact with the characters from Wanted, which was Mark Millar's first creator-owned book. So everything is coming full circle. It's really, really cool, because up until now, all of his books were standalone. Kick-Ass didn't appear in MPH. The Secret Service, the Kingsman book, had nothing to do with Starlight. But now he's telling us, yeah, this all happened in the same world. So that's really interesting. And I have read the first issue of Big Game, and he makes it work. It makes sense that this is all happening in the same universe. And I was a little worried that it was going to be something like, oh, they're all being shot through portals and they end up in a Secret Wars type situation. But no, it's just straight up, they're all from the same universe and they're all aware of each other. Some shit's about to go down, because all the Wanted guys are working with Nemesis to take down all these new superheroes that are coming out of the woodwork, because the villains had this big plan and spent so much time getting rid of all the heroes in the world. And they don't want this to happen again, because they've been living a luxurious and fruitful life without all the heroes coming in and ruining their fun, basically. So I can't wait for the rest of that series. The first issue was really awesome. It's just a great time to be reading Mark Millar stuff. I feel like he's one of the only guys that's thinking about what he would want to read instead of trying to, look at the zeitgeist or whatever and try to pinpoint what people are interested in now, because that's always going to get you the most readers. If you really just do something that you want and you want to read, other people are going to feel that enthusiasm and they're going to like it too. And I mean, it doesn't hurt that he's bringing in every single character that he's created for the most part. So yeah, Nemesis Reloaded, I would say, is the better comic if I have to compare the two. I still really like the first Nemesis. I thought it was really fun and over the top. But yeah, Nemesis Reloaded was just a very well done origin story for a supervillain. The pacing was better. The plotting was better. It had more time to breathe, just with that one extra issue. I would definitely recommend picking up Nemesis Reloaded. You don't have to read Nemesis, although I would say to pick that up as well. As far as this new crossover goes, that's called Big Game, this is all you need to read as far as Nemesis goes. I would definitely read Wanted as well if you haven't read that, because it's a huge part of his crossover. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Thanks again for listening. I think I'm going to finally put up a playlist now that I'm 3 episodes in to the Ron Reviews podcast. I've been having a lot of fun with this, and I'm going to try to do it as much as I can, because I really like this freeform way of talking about books or movies or whatever it is that I'm interested in at the time. So thanks for listening. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content, and I'll be back next time with episode 4 of the Ron Reviews podcast. Take care. Hey everyone, it's Ron here with a quick announcement. When I started this channel, I was reading and reviewing the Dune books and other sci-fi related material, and most of you might not know that I'm also a musician. So when I was reading these sci-fi books, I started to get inspired and decided to make my own soundtrack to use for my videos, and now I'm excited to tell you all about the first volume in the Ron Reviews original soundtrack collection. This album includes the first 17 tracks featured on my channel, and it's available now exclusively on Bandcamp. Be sure to check the description of this video for the link to the album. Thanks so much for the support so far. I know I'm just starting out, but I hope you're having as much fun as I am. So check out the original soundtrack Volume 1 on Bandcamp. This music is great if you want something moody and atmospheric to listen to while you're reading some science fiction. I think you're going to love it. Thanks.